World. How has everybody been? Hope everyone has been healthy, feeling good, doing good. And in case you haven't, I wish you tons of mental strength. You got it. All right, so let's take a look at the autopsy of Trinity Backus today. It's going to be a brief overview. We are going to look at her location where she and her belongings were found, and the condition of her hands and feet, as well as the rest of her body. We will discuss her clothing found on her. We will visit the toxicology report and run a quick clerical check on the document, which just means that we're going to take a look at typos, inconsistencies, and that type of thing if we come across those. So, do you see what I see? This is the autopsy record, undated, with a header by Sheriff Moon and a signature of Gregory Reber. And the first thing I see here is I see whiteout. I put a little black mustache by the part where I'm seeing whiteout, and as we know, this makes the document null and void because in medical documentation, you're supposed to cross out any incorrect information, put a date and a signature there, so you can't just place whiteout on medical or forensic documents. And no, we are not looking at the autopsy of Kiely Rodni, where we saw the exact same thing. This is the autopsy of Trinity Backus, done by the same forensic pathologist as Kiely's was done by, Mr. Reber, MD, who makes sure to include MD in his signature. I find it humorous. Next, let's take a look at a few inconsistencies that caught my eye right away. So the coroner final report of investigation right here on the 28th of December. So this is the final document, the final page, the final paper. After all the autopsy has been concluded, after obviously finding the body, examining the body, they are telling us that Trinity's height is 5 feet 7 inches, which is interesting because Gregory Reber identifies Trinity's height or the length of her body as 69 inches, and then which is 5 foot 9 inches, so she's 5'9", or 69 inches. And then we see the same height on the autopsy record, the undated page that sums up the findings of Reber on a template with a header by Shannon Moon. So we are seeing 5'9", 5'9" on all these documents, and then 5'7" on the final report. So which was it? And yes, height or length of the body does not change after you pass away. It remains the same. Next, let's take a look at the coroner final report of investigation. You guys, the ones who are familiar with my channel, know that mustaches mean bloopers, if we can use this word on a forensic document. Does not sound too humorous, but it is what it is. So the address of Trinity's residence is left blank, and I'm reminding you that this is not the document that was put together on 10th, 11th, 12th of November when Trinity went missing and was found. Nothing like that. This is the final report dated December 28. So there's a blank line blank spot, blank nothing. Her address is not mentioned. So she doesn't have a residence. It's like, is she homeless? Does she live in Grass Valley? I don't know. This is very frustrating. Next, she has no relatives. So her mom is listed in the paperwork in the rest of the autopsy, like where the deputy is saying that the family was notified. But however, on the final report on December 28th, no relatives are listed somehow. And the significant condition of her passing away is listed as recent LSD consumption, and LSD did show up on her autopsy, but we're going to go through why I have some questions about this. So the autopsy assistant were Brittany Brand and Chrissy Myers. So once again, we're looking at a name. I do sincerely apologize if this is her full first name. I just suspect that she's Christine, and Chrissy is probably what they call her, that this name should not be on a legal document. I'm suspecting. Again, I did not find her on Facebook or LinkedIn. I don't know her qualifications, but it just seems odd that they're using a short name. And next, of course, the whiteout, which we have already covered. So moving on, this was the address Trinity went missing from. And let's remember that allegedly she left barefoot, wearing pajama pants and a sweater. So it sounds as if she took a half a mile hike or walk up the road. So this would have taken someone 10 minutes to walk wherever she was headed if they were walking on the road. And then right here is a ravine, so I don't think she could have crossed that. We're going to cover that in the next slide. So she would have probably walked like so and entered through here to end up where she was. So I just want to pay quick attention to the terrain because this does not look like a nice or pleasant 10-minute hike, 15-minute hike if you count the time in the bushes, if you can even traverse that, right? So this is the terrain we're looking at. It's very rocky. This is the photo from the property where Trinity's remains were discovered. And you can see that it's thick brushery, lots of bushes. And this is the photo of the house, kind of like across from Trinity's auntie's place, the place she went missing from, and I included it because we can see cacti here. So she would have been walking on cactus needles, as we see lots of cactuses around in the neighborhood. And also right here we see pine needles. So she would have been walking on cactus needles, pine needles, rocks through dense bushery. And let's have a quick look at this map. So Trinity would have left from this address on Kentucky Ravine Road and either walked up the road and never been found by whoever was looking for her. So maybe they weren't looking for her in the first 10 minutes of her disappearance. Maybe they drove the other way, or maybe the narrative is just slightly different from what we are being told, but let's dig a little deeper. So here I've just removed the pins of where Trinity's sweater and necklace and body were found. So they were all found down this ravine. And if we take those pins off, so if she did not walk the road, she would have had to cross and indeed headed out through the back patio, through the back door, through the yard. I just don't see her safely crossing this ravine right here because it's rather deep. And let's look at the terrain real quick. So we're talking thick bush. So if she didn't cross this ravine, this was the ravine where she was found. So next I want to include this V-shaped area of the road. So this is the V of the road. Let's zoom in and take a look at the blue mark is where her sweater was found. The green mark is where her necklace was found. And the yellow mark with the star is where Trinity's body was found. And I just want you to notice these roads on the sides, kind of forming like a tulip shape right here. Hope you can see them. Right here are the roads. And if we zoom in, we can see that her sweater and necklace are found a minute away from each other. Then it would have probably taken her another 10 minutes or more, if this is even walkable, through the ravine to get here. And one thing I want you to notice is that these two places are connected by a road. So this might be part of my conspiratorial thinking, or this might just be part of my objective thinking. Did she get up there through the roads, like first stopping right here and then traveling north? Or was it something else that happened? So taking a look at Trinity's body, the state of her body, and there's going to be no scary images here. I'm going to give trigger warnings when those are necessary. Oh, that's my cat you're hearing in the background. All right, so Trinity's body was covered with abrasions, and abrasions are a medical term for scratches and scrapes. And we might think of small scrapes, but actually a skinned elbow or a skinned knee would be an abrasion, as well as a rash from rubbing the skin against a rough surface like gravel, which would be something like maybe falling downhill and hitting your different parts of your body against the rocks. So you would get those different types of abrasions. Then what you see in this picture, besides the abrasions, are also cuts. Those are usually called lacerations, but if they're not deep cuts, not deep gushing type of wounds, then they're just called abrasions. And next, her body was covered in contusions. And a contusion is just a fancy medical term for bruises. There's no difference between these two words. Contusions are not more severe than bruises, not less severe than bruises. It's a synonym, so they mean the exact same thing. And what is a bruise? A bruise is blood or bleeding under the skin due to trauma of any kind. So the blood is not exiting our body, the bleeding is happening underneath our skin, so to say. And then the contusions can be of different colors, so the bruises can be of different colors. As you guys all know, like the healing cycle of a bruise, if they are pink or red, it's been the day of the injury or 2 days past. If they are blue or purplish. It would be 2 to 5 days from the time of injury. And Trinity's bruises were pink, bright pink, and dark pink in color. So I will let you guys decide where those fall on the scale. Yeah, I'm not gonna comment on that, but they would be falling somewhere between these two, but mostly pink and red. So now I'm gonna go over Trinity's contusions or bruises, and there's going to be no pictures. I'm just going to be briefly describing their locations. And I want to point out that her bruises were sometimes coincided with her scrapes and scratches, or what they call abrasions in this autopsy, and sometimes they didn't. So sometimes Trinity's remains just had bruises that didn't have any scratches on top of them. Okay, so no scary imagery. I'm just gonna list the locations of the bruising. So starting from her head, and here I'm listing the maximum dimension of the bruise. So you can imagine the bruise as kind of circular or oval, but most of them were close to circular shape, maybe a little bit oval. So for example, maybe a contusion could be like 4 by 3 inches or like 2 by 1.5. So keeping that in mind, I'm only listing, for the sake of time, I'm only listing the maximum dimension of the bruise. So the maximum dimension would be this length right here, okay? And the place where the bruise was located. So on her forehead, she had a 2-inch bruise, 1-inch bruise on the bridge of her nose, 1.5-inch, and several of those, which is very important. I just wanted to highlight that she had several 1.5-inch bruises on her right shoulder and her upper right arm. She had several 2-inch bruises on her inner right forearm. And she had a 4-inch bruise on the back, or like the top or the back of her right hand. So not the palm of her hand, but the opposite side, right? She also had a 3-inch, several 3-inch bruises on the back side of her left forearm and elbow. 1.5-inch bruise on the back or top of her left wrist and hand, and she had several of those. So several on the forearm and elbow, several on the wrist and hand. On the inner side, so this was us discussing the top left side, and now let's discuss the inner side, right? The inner forearm. So she had a 4.5-inch bruise on her left inner forearm, and the word confluent here just means that it is a formation of several bruises overlapping and connecting together, forming this shape of 4.5 inches long. Next, moving to her right hip. So we have covered her right shoulder, right forearm and hand, left forearm, wrist and hand. Now we're talking about her right leg. So there was a 7-inch bruise on her right hip, several 2-inch bruises on her right thigh, a 6-inch area of overlapping bruises on her right knee, 4-inch area of a bruise on the top surface of her right foot. So if you look down at your feet right now, you're going to see the top surface of your feet, right? Where the toenails are. So that's the surface we're talking about. We're not talking about the soles of her feet yet. Next, looking at her left leg, 1.5-inch bruise on her left thigh. So confluent means that there were several smaller bruises in that area. 4.5-inch bruise on her left knee, which was several bruises overlapping and forming this area. And then the autopsy, what I found, I don't want to say interesting, but peculiar, is that they just say that the left leg had a similar pattern to the right. Which raises the question of why not bother listing the entirety of the injuries? Like, what is the rush? Like, I'm doing this overview for free, but Dr. Reber gets paid for his work. And I feel like listing that the left leg had a similar pattern to the right without going into detail about it, I don't know how I feel about that. I don't feel good about it. All right, so next, looking at her left foot, looking at the top surface of her left foot, there were various scattered bruises. So they were not necessarily overlapping, but they were very close to each other, and that surface was 5 inches long. So lots and lots of bruising, and then once again, some of it coincides with scratches and scrapes, including bleeding, and then some of it just doesn't. So some of the bruises are on their own. Next, talking about the state of her body, Trinity's body had no fractures of the bones. She was found covered in red-brown dirt, and it just says that face, body, and extremities were covered by red-brown dirt. And then we don't know if they were, what does covered mean? Is it lightly soiled, moderately soiled, heavily soiled? It doesn't go into detail about that. But covered makes me think that those are not smudges, but rather most of the surface area of her body. And some of the scratches and abrasions I did want to cover in this autopsy overview are her knuckles. So right here we see right index, middle, ring, and little fingers have scratches or abrasions up to 1 centimeter, so that's a little less than a half of an inch. There was the maximum dimension on her right knuckles, and then we read right here that the proximal, so closer to the upper side of her arm, the proximal interphalangeal joints, which just means knuckles, of the left middle and ring fingers show irregular areas of abrasion up to 1.6 centimeters in size. That's again about a little more than half an inch. Let me grab my calculator so that I have it on hand here. All right. So that's what's important. Think about it. Her knuckles have abrasions or cuts and scrapes. Her nails are soiled. Her toenails are dirty. And I'm quoting the autopsy here. But look at the underlined parts with me, please. No injuries are seen on the palm of the right hand. So we all understand that part, right? No injuries on the palm of the right hand. And next it goes on, or the palmar surface of the fingers. And this is very easy. Palmar just means of the palm. So palmar surface of the fingers. So, and the same thing on her left hand. So the palms and the inner parts of her fingers and the palmar surfaces, there are no injuries. So not only is there no bruising, but there are no scratches. None of that. Yet her knuckles are damaged. So just think about it. Next, looking at the state of her feet, we read that the fingernails are short, intact, and heavily soiled. So the fingernails are heavily soiled. The toenails are short, intact, and dirty. And now we're looking at the soles of the feet. They are moderately soiled. So not heavily soiled. They're not heavily soiled. And if we think of someone traversing the terrain that we just looked at with hills and ravines and rocks and little rivers and pine needles and cacti needles, there are no signs of that. So they're moderately soiled, and there are no scrapes, no needles, no bruises, no nail injury. And the soles of the feet are also minimally calloused, and calluses are thick, hardened layers of skin that develop when the skin tries to protect itself against friction, which is rubbing or pressure. So it's those parts that we need to like scrub off for the sake of beauty. Those parts are called calluses, but I think everyone knows that, right? I just wanted to pay your guys' attention that they were minimally calloused. So this is inconsistent with her frequently walking barefoot, I would say. Because someone who frequently walks barefoot, their skin is not stupid. It's gonna grow calluses to protect itself against rubbing, pressure, against trauma. So her feet were soft and moderately soiled. And I'm gonna illustrate this type of situation so that you guys can think together with me. This is gonna be my trigger warning. I know that some people are triggered and feel uncomfortable around pictures of the feet, so this would be your time to close your eyes, and I'll let you guys know when to open your eyes. I'm gonna be showing pictures of feet. To me, feet are just feet, just like any other body part of the human body, right? So everyone who doesn't like feet, please close your eyes, but keep listening. I am not going to be going into any gruesome details here. So let's think of Trinity crossing the terrain that I just described. And so her body was covered in dirt, but not her feet. So these are just some examples from the internet of people walking in dirt and mud, muddy soil, or for example, I know that California tends to be pretty dry, so for example, walking on the road or walking through the woods, you would expect to see some pretty heavy soiling for someone to get that far by foot, right? So we just looked at heavy soiling. And then on the other side of the spectrum would be lightly soiled feet. I see this is someone just walking through their yard, like their garden. Lightly soiled feet, like dust, a little bit of debris. And then this picture I would label moderately soiled, where it's not light, but it's not heavy, but this is what they are looking at when they are describing Trinity's feet, which for me is inconsistent with someone walking that far barefoot. And I mean, at all. Okay, so now you guys can all open your eyes. Welcome back. Hope you have not fallen asleep. The next image is going to show a picture of a bruise. It's not Trinity's bruise, just a picture from the internet. If you get easily triggered by that, don't look, but it's not going to be scary, just a tiny bruise on an elbow. Let's go ahead. So stay with me or close your eyes. This is a picture of the bruise I was talking about. It's not that awful, right? Pink and purple, just a regular bruise on the elbow. And as I said, that Trinity's body was covered in what they labeled to be contusions or bruises. And we know that there can be external or internal causes for these manifestations, for these bruises. So external would include injury, blunt trauma, or fractures. So I do understand that a fracture is an internal process, but a fracture is rarely, unless you're super elderly, triggered by internal factors. So usually it's an external factor of us like falling on the ground, hitting against something that causes a fracture, and then the fracture gets covered with the bruise. So as we know, Trinity's body had no fractures, injury, or blunt trauma. I hope you will have a better understanding of it towards the end of the presentation. Let's, for example, say that Trinity's body was so heavily covered in bruises due to some internal reasons, right? So we're playing devil's advocate here. For example, that she was just someone who was anemic or bruising easily, and an amount of LSD was found in her system, and we know that LSD does not seem to be a factor in bruising. There have been no research connecting LSD consumption with bruising. In fact, there's been one piece of research from, I think, the 80s, where a patient came in after consuming LSD and she was heavily covered with bruises, and upon investigation, it was clearly stated that LSD did not seem to be a factor of bruising on her. It was connected with other simultaneous concurrent drug use, right? Maybe if Trinity was not bruised due to external factors, for example, and we know it's not linked to LSD, we know that vitamin K deficiency may lead to easy bruising, as well as iron deficiency, as well as some platelet disorders, bleeding disorders, which are sometimes one and the same, sometimes they're different things, taking certain medications, such as anticoagulants, which means a group of medications that prevent blood clotting, such as everyday low-dose aspirin or coumarine. This all might lead to easy bruising. And let's think about this. So why I added this slide? We mentioned right here platelet disorder, and that's what is going to oftentimes be concurrent or happening at the same time with an iron deficiency or any bleeding disorder. Why? Because platelets are these gluey looking blood cells, and if the blood vessel gets damaged, the body sends signals to platelets, these cells. So right here you see a red blood cell, white blood cell, and a platelet. And these platelets travel to the injured area, and once they arrive at the site, they clump together to form a clot, which helps to stop bleeding. Right? So let's just think briefly and very, very generally of this mechanism of platelets, right? We're thinking about bleeding, clotting, those types of disorders would be causing easy bruising, right? But what is a contusion? What is a bruise? A bruise is blood or bleeding under the skin. due to trauma of any kinds. So it's also blood and bleeding. And if a person had any of those disorders and was covered in bruises just simply due to the fact that they had a medical condition conducive, or leading to them bruising easily, it means that we would see an association with bleeding. We would see bleeding of the gums, of the internal organs, into the body cavities, like nosebleeds and rashes and that type of thing. So reading straight from the autopsy, it says the teeth, Trinity's teeth, were in good condition. Oral, which means mouth. Mucus, which means the wet part of the mouth. Oral, mucus, membrane, so like the insides of your cheek, underneath the tongue, the roof of your mouth, show no injury. No blood is seen in the mouth, so no blood around gums. Internal organs are smooth without lesions, and lesions are abnormal tissue due to trauma or inflammation. So internal organs are not swollen, they're not bleeding, there's no excess body in the body cavities. I found, this is not quoting from the autopsy, but just reading through it, I found no signs of nosebleed, no mentions about that. There were no mentions of any rashes or red or purple dots that would be associated with these blood or platelet disorders. Which leads me to believe that Trinity's bruises were due to external trauma, and I highly doubt that they would have been exacerbated by some internal processes, because then we would see bleeding associated with that, and we don't see excessive bleeding anywhere on the external or internal sides of her body. And next, I want to visit Trinity's toxicology. As I've already mentioned, a certain amount of LSD was identified in her blood. There was no cannabis found. So if you guys remember the narrative was that Trinity took LSD and then took a hit of cannabis, and that exacerbated her trip, really sent her on the bad trip, and she ran out the back door and off to the woods, allegedly. But there was no cannabis found in her system, which means she did not, there was no trace amounts of cannabis, so she didn't take it that day, the day before, a couple days before. Just no cannabis whatsoever, no trace amounts of cannabis that would be detectable in her system. She tested positive for caffeine and nicotine, and then we know that nicotine turns into cotinine within the body. So nicotine is on the outside of the body, and cotinine is on the inside of the body. We're talking about the same thing. So caffeine positive, nicotine positive, cannabis negative, LSD trace amounts. And when it comes to LSD metabolism, we know that the half-life is the time it takes for the amount of drug's active substance to reduce by half. So let's look at it visually, right? When we just take LSD, or someone or a patient takes LSD, the amounts of LSD are very high in their system, right? So this would be around a 10, and then we know that in about 2-3 hours, the amount of drug in their system is only going to be half of whatever they started off with, and that's in 3 hours. And if you look at 8 hours, so it would go down from like a 10 to a 1. So LSD metabolizes rapidly at baseline, means it metabolizes very quickly. It disappears from the system pretty quickly. And the fact that there was a trace amount found in Trinity's remains, it might mean that she microdosed rather shortly before passing away, which does not coincide with the narrative we were given. Or it could mean that Trinity took it earlier in the day, so she took it 8 hours, for example, prior to her passing, which could also be linked to the question, did she stay alive for hours? And that was why her body metabolized the LSD. That's a valid question. We also don't know if, for example, she slipped and fell and lost consciousness. How long was she able to stay? How long was her body able to stay actually alive, her heart pumping, her metabolism going, if the temperature was in the low 40s? There are many factors here. Again, she might have been not acclimated to this at all, so be like an indoor creature like myself. Like I'm used to room temperatures, and I don't like the deviations or changes in the temperature. Or maybe she was indeed someone who took, I don't know, walks in cold weather, like, you know, Alaska natives or Aboriginal peoples of Australia. They're completely comfortable in low 40s. Us, the residents of America, of USA, are usually not that acclimated to those temperatures. So I'm saying there's a lot of factors at play, and I know nothing about Trinity's metabolism, and I only know that there were 200 milliliters. Let me transfer that. Oh no, my calculator is out of battery, of course. So that would be a little less than like 7 ounces, I'm estimating, of liquid in her stomach, and it was verified that that liquid did not have an alcoholic smell, so it was non-alcoholic liquid. Maybe that was something that contained caffeine, maybe it was a Red Bull. So she had 200 milliliters of liquid in her stomach, very little food, no remnants of any pills. And considering that she only had a little food, she would have metabolized LSD twice faster than someone after a meal would. So that's also an important factor here. And another thing to consider is, was this Trinity's first time, or did she take it prior? I do remember her boyfriend commenting on it, and either he said that LSD was not something they tended to take, or was it something they have taken together before? I don't remember the details. I do remember him making a statement about it, but I don't remember what he said exactly. So if you do, please let me know in the comments. That would be interesting and important. Next, I want to bring your guys' attention that panic attacks and psychotic episodes can occur with consumption of LSD when people have pre-existing personality disorders or pre-psychotic disorders. When they use hallucinogens, we don't know what the state of Trinity's mental health was. I genuinely have no idea. I don't know anything about her personality, but I want to point out that when we're talking about the brain, we're talking about mental health, we're talking about personality disorders, there are always, like, you know, in the rest of medicine, there are gonna be exceptions. So, for example, you know, there was a study in University of Chicago that they were giving microdoses of LSD between 13 micrograms to 36 micrograms. And they considered, the scientists conducting the experiment considered those dosages totally safe. They didn't have much adverse effects. In fact, this is a graph from that study right here. So we see that lots of people had any effect, good effects. Some people had poor, bad drug effects. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there are exceptions. There are gonna be people who take 300 micrograms of LSD, and they would still experience the effects, but they would sustain no damage from that. And there are also people with super sensitive brains who might take, I don't know, 40 micrograms and have permanent brain injury. We just don't know. Everyone's brains are different. The sensitivity is something that's very, very individual. So I can't tell you exactly how much LSD Trinity took. There might be other professionals on YouTube more versed in pharmacology who would be able to give you more detail. But in general, we have to remember that all these studies on LSD paused, after the 60s and 70s, so the data is not as robust in its metabolism and effects. Another thing I wanted to point out is there was a trace amount of aspirated gastric content in the trachea. So aspirated means breathed in. So an inhale is an aspiration. Gastric content is the content of your stomach, and it was found in the trachea. So whatever was in her stomach, not all of it, a little bit of it, traveled up her esophagus, and then was inhaled into the trachea. And the trachea is depicted right here. It's an airway between the voice box and the lungs. So it's an airway leading to the lungs. We don't want any food there. If we inhale food into the lungs, that can lead to pneumonia. So it's best to, the body's gonna fight that. It's gonna choke and cough it up and try to expel whatever you inhaled. So it seems like Trinity also had this type of situation. I would not call it vomiting because there was no trace amount of anything in her mouth, nothing around her mouth. But there was this situation of choking up food and inhaling it. And I can't tell you exactly why that could have happened to her. Could be an LSD side effect, could be something physiological or something physical that was happening to her due to external factors. I don't know. It just stood out to me. This is not usual, not normal. Another thing I wanted to point out is there's a bit of an inconsistency between Trinity's autopsy and Kiely Rodni's autopsy, because both autopsies were conducted by the same pathophysiologist in the same state, more or less the same area. They're like an hour and a half away from each other by car. And if you guys remember, in Kiely's autopsy, there was a long description of clothing that was on her, underwear, jewelry, various piercings, all of that stuff. Like, it was a really long description. Trinity's autopsy had a 3-page description of her bruises and cuts. 3 pages, guys. So her entire body was covered in bruises and cuts. But I digress. Trinity was found wearing multiple bracelets, rings, a nose ring, but all these items were collected and booked into Sheriff's Property Unit. And 4 days later, when her autopsy was conducted, Trinity had no clothing on and no jewelry on. except for the soiled strings tied around each ankle. So those are anklets. And I kind of avoided the topic of Trinity's clothing here because it makes me very sick. I don't know if I should give an SA trigger warning here. You guys can interpret the information, according to your understanding and your own trauma. But she was found wearing no clothes except for a pair of tan colored shorts that went to the top of her thigh area, which makes me think that her buttocks, for example, were not covered by those shorts. And I'm wondering if shorts is the word they use for underwear that looks like a boy short underwear. Not too sure, but that was the only thing she was found wearing. And when she was delivered to the autopsy, that piece of clothing was already removed, which I just don't understand the inconsistency between the procedures between Trinity and Kiely here, when Kiely was delivered just as she was found. Then next point, this is probably me just nitpicking, or you can name it whatever, but this is page 1 of Trinity's autopsy, and we read that both earlobes are pierces, not pierced as it should be, right? So there's a typo on page 1 of her autopsy, and I look at my keyboard and I see that S and D are side by side, and yes, it's so easy to slip and make this mistake. But to me, it's a question of respect, of honoring the dead, and I feel that we as a society, we should strive to have autopsies nice and clean and orderly, as well as obituaries, just on people's way out of our society. Can we keep things orderly and clean as a sign of respect for the departing? And I wanted to include a quote by Voltaire that says, "To the living we owe respect, but to the dead we owe only the truth." And the truth is that this autopsy, with all the injuries found on Trinity's body, concluded that the cause of death was hypothermia, which means exposure to low temperatures, so frostbite, an injury from that, and someone just not necessarily freezing alive, but just dying due to dropping body temperatures. So Trinity's cause of death was probable hypothermia due to prolonged environmental exposure. And I can't disagree with what they're saying. I pulled up the weather from that day in Nevada City. And so Trinity ran into the woods around so we would have 7, 8, 9, 10:30. So right here around this dip in temperature when it was hitting around 45-ish, and then climbing slightly up, and then after midnight the temperature started dropping into low 40s. So it was cold. It was objectively cold for someone who was not acclimated to that weather, or someone who, for example, tripped and fell and lost consciousness, or someone who was not moving actively, or whatever the side effects of LSD allegedly could have been. But I just don't understand how someone, yes, she might have consumed LSD, and I don't agree with the word that it was necessarily recent. So it was either a recent, depending what they call recent, but it just doesn't support the story that she, for example, consumed it in the evening, and then ran off and died right away. So she would have had to stay alive for a little while. But I can't pinpoint exactly how long, because like I said, it would depend on her the metabolism of her own body, as well as her brain sensitivity to the compound. And last but not least, this is just the date and the end of the autopsy, and the edits are not by me. All I did was zoom in, and this is the final page of the autopsy, and y'all can't tell me, like, you can't convince me that this two, what's happening here? I don't have an explanation. The twos, like, the numbers look different. Like, was it photoshopped in? Like, what is this pixelation around the date of the 21st? Why? I don't have an explanation to this, and it does make me hesitant and conspiratorial, because this is not normal. If you guys see what I see, and if you don't, please let me know in the comments. Be like, hey Cass, the date looks completely normal to me. I don't know what you're talking about. But I'm talking about the heightened pixelation of these 3 digits right here. And since we're on the conspiratorial topic, I want to ask you guys a question. So if we look at the route that was taken up here through the road, and no one saw her, no one noticed her, so she walked on the road, and again, think of all the oils and the dirt on the road, and that I'm not a car person, but think of the black oil that comes from the cars. How do you traverse this with moderately soiled feet, so basically cleanish feet, and then no scrapes, no injury whatsoever? And then if we zoom closer into the V shape, remember I was talking about these 2 roads, and if we zoom even closer into these 2 roads, right, so this is the ravine, this is where the sweater, and this is where the necklace were found, so about a minute away from each other. If you can even measure distance in minutes when you're running up and down a ravine, do you guys, I don't think this road had anything to do with it, again, because there's this like little stream or a ravine here. But if we look at this road, doesn't it just seem like someone might have taken a rural road and reached this flat area and placed the body here, as well as maybe on this turn run in and place the items here? I don't know. This is the conspiratorial part of the video. Why are there abrasions on her knuckles and bruises all over the body, sometimes coinciding with the scratches and scrapes and sometimes not? Why are her hands, the palms of her hands, in perfect shape, when if you fall down the hill, your body is going to try to find equilibrium and catch itself upright and hold onto the surface of whatever you're falling down? Like, I doubt that anyone can fall down with their holding their fists together. I don't see that happening naturally. And then the last part, I wanted to add a visual to it, but I'll just walk you guys through it. Is that she was found on her back, her right leg straight, her left knee bent, right, and her left ankle on the inner side of her right thigh. So we're kind of thinking a figure 4 with her legs. And then the palms of her hands were on her hips. So how do you fall like that? Wouldn't you be spread like a star, or just why are her hands placed like that? Like, unless she was dying for some time, and again, pardon my vocabulary here, but autopsies are morbid topics. Why were her hands held like that? What do you guys think? Do you have any explanation? Like, who falls like that? And the autopsy also mentioned there were foot marks around Trinity's body, coinciding with the fact that she might have slipped and fell. Really? Fell with the figure 4 with her legs and her hands and her hips? That's a weird falling position for a body, and I don't care if she was sober or not. The body is going to take natural, instinctual, reflectory positions as it's approaching death, and it's just not going to be one of those, in my humble opinion. But I'm going to jump off right here. Thank you guys so much for stopping by. I forgot to include my ethical disclaimer here that I'm not a criminal investigator. I've never been to Trachea. I'm not associated with any communities. I do not accuse anybody in any of my videos, and all my videos are made for education and entertainment purposes only. Have a blessed weekend, and bye!